In a castle of gray stone and tall towers, lived a knight named Tarnished Tim. His armor wasn't tarnished from battle, for he kept it polished bright as a mirror. It was his name that felt tarnished, a name he gave himself because of a deep, dark secret. Tim, a knight sworn to be brave, was afraid of shadows. Not the simple, still shadows that lay quietly on the floor when the sun was high. He was afraid of the other kind. The long, stretching shadows that crept along the walls at dusk, the dancing, flickering shadows cast by a lonely candle, and most of all, the strange new shadows that had begun to appear in his castle. These were not ordinary shadows. They twisted into shapes that didn't belong. A shadow of a chair would suddenly sprout what looked like thorny branches. The shadow of a suit of armor would ripple, as if it were made of water. They seemed to sigh and moan, filling the grand, empty halls with a feeling of deep sadness. For weeks, Tim had tried to fight them. He would swing his sword, a brave act that only made the shadows dance and laugh, splitting into a dozen smaller, faster shadows that skittered into corners. He would light every candle and torch he could find, but the light only seemed to make the darkness behind it deeper, and the shadows it created more menacing. His fear grew with every passing day, a cold stone in his stomach. The problem was getting worse. The shadows were no longer just in the corners. They were beginning to cover the beautiful tapestries and creep across the great dining table, making his home feel like a stranger. He knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that these strange, sad shadows were coming from one place: the Whispering Woods, the ancient forest that bordered his castle lands. The Whispering Woods was a place of legends. It was said the trees themselves had voices, and that the wind carried secrets if you only knew how to listen. But Tim had never listened. He was a knight. His job was to be loud, to be strong, to solve problems with the gleaming edge of his sword, not with his ears. But his sword was useless against these shadowy invaders. With a heavy heart and a shaky breath, he knew what he had to do. He had to go into the woods. He had to face the source of the shadows, and in doing so, face his greatest fear. He buckled on his shiniest armor, a metal shell to hide the trembling boy inside, and pushed open the heavy castle doors. The path to the Whispering Woods lay before him, a journey not of battle, but of understanding. The moment Tim stepped under the canopy of the first great trees, the world changed. The air grew cool and smelled of damp earth and sweet flowers. The light of the sun was filtered through 1,000 green leaves, dappling the ground in shifting patterns of light and, of course, shadow. Tim felt his heart beat faster. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig made him jump. The shadows here were ancient and deep, and they seemed to watch him with 1,000 unseen eyes. His first challenge came not from a fearsome beast, but from a river. It wasn't wide, but it was fast, churning and bubbling over sharp, slick rocks. As a knight, Tim's first thought was one of force. He would conquer this obstacle. He spent an hour trying to fell a small tree to make a bridge, his axe echoing strangely in the quiet woods. But the wood was too strong, and his axe simply bounced off. He then tried to build a dam of stones to slow the water, but the river simply pushed them aside with a gurgling laugh. Exhausted and frustrated, he sat on the bank, his armor feeling heavy and useless. The flowing water seemed to whisper, a sound he had ignored before. He closed his eyes and just listened. It wasn't an angry sound. It was a busy, happy sound. He noticed how the water flowed around the largest, smoothest stones, not against them. He saw a family of otters slip effortlessly into the current, using its own power to guide them. An idea, quiet as a whisper, formed in his mind. He wasn't meant to fight the river. He was meant to work with it. He took off his heavy metal boots and felt the cool water on his feet. He stepped carefully, not on the sharp, fighting rocks, but on the smooth, steady ones that the river had already accepted. He moved with the current, not against it, and in a few moments he was safely on the other side, his heart filled with a strange new feeling. It wasn't victory. It was harmony. He had shown the river a small bit of respect, and it had shown him the way. But as he looked deeper into the woods, he knew his journey was far from over. The shadows here were darker, and the sadness felt heavier. Continuing on, Tim found his path blocked by a great thicket of thorns. The brambles were thick and tangled, a wall of woody claws that seemed to grab at his cloak. His knightly instincts flared up again. A wall must be breached. He drew his sword, its polished surface reflecting the grim determination on his face. He slashed and hacked, trying to carve a path through the thorns. But a strange thing happened. For every branch he cut, two more seemed to spring up in its place, thicker and thornier than before. The thicket wasn't just a plant. It felt alive and it felt defensive. The more he fought it, the more it fought back. Soon he was surrounded, his armor scratched and his spirit dwindling. He was trapped. Defeated, he let his sword fall to his side. He was breathing heavily, his anger fading into despair. It was then, in the silence that followed his struggle, that he heard a tiny sound. A small bird, a robin with a bright red chest, was caught on one of the thorns, chirping a sound of distress. The bird wasn't fighting. It was waiting. Forgetting his own predicament, Tim's heart went out to the little creature. He carefully, gently, reached out his gauntlet hand. He didn't push or pull. He slowly untangled the delicate wing from the sharp thorn, his movements full of a care he hadn't realized he possessed. The moment the bird was free, it chirped a note of thanks and flew away. And then, the most magical thing happened. The very branch that had held the bird captive seemed to relax. It slowly, gently pulled back. Tim watched, his eyes wide with wonder. Could it be that simple? He approached the wall of thorns not with a sword, but with open, gentle hands. He spoke to it, his voice barely a whisper, conveying his need to pass and promising no harm. The brambles rustled and a narrow, arching path opened before him, as if he were being invited through. He had tried to command the thicket and failed. But when he had offered it respect, it had offered him a path. Have you ever tried to be very, very quiet in a park or a garden, little explorer? What kinds of secret sounds did you hear? As Tim walked through the now welcoming thicket, he thought about how he had only ever heard the loud sounds of the world, the clang of swords, the blast of trumpets, the shouting of orders. But here in the woods, the most important sounds were the quietest ones. He was beginning to learn the forest's language, and it wasn't a language of words, but of actions. It was a language of respect. His next lesson came from the wind. As he ventured deeper, the trees grew taller, their tops disappearing into the misty canopy. A wind began to blow, not a gentle breeze, but a howling gale that whipped through the branches with a mournful cry. Pushed against him, trying to force him back. It was a sound of immense grief. Tim, remembering his lessons, didn't try to push through it. He found the base of an enormous, ancient oak tree, its bark wrinkled like an old, wise face, and sheltered himself from the gale. He didn't curse the wind. He simply waited and listened to its song of sorrow. He wondered what could make the wind itself so sad. He looked at the giant oak that was protecting him. Its branches were strong, but some were broken, and its leaves looked faded and weary. He placed a hand on its rough bark and felt a deep, slow sadness that seemed to rise from its very roots. The whole forest was hurting. The river, the thicket, the wind, the trees, they were all in pain. Tim realized the shadows in his castle were not monsters to be fought. They were echoes. They were the shadows of the forest's own pain, reaching out for help. This whole time he had been trying to fight a symptom of the sickness, not the sickness itself. The forest wasn't angry with him. It was crying out, and its sorrow was so powerful it was spilling over into his home. A new feeling replaced his fear. A deep and profound sense of empathy. He was no longer Tarnished Tim, the knight afraid of shadows. He was Tim, a friend who had finally understood. He needed to find the heart of the woods, not to conquer it, but to heal it. He stood up, and the wind no longer pushed against him. Instead, it seemed to guide him, its mournful cry now a gentle whisper, showing him the way forward. The wind led him to a clearing at the very center of the woods. And what he saw made his heart ache. It was a place that had once been beautiful, but now it was a scene of disrespect. A stream that fed the woods had been blocked by carelessly piled rocks, turning the clearing into a muddy, stagnant bog. Beautiful ancient trees had been marked with deep, thoughtless cuts in their bark. Piles of forgotten, rusted tools lay scattered about, leaking strange colors into the soil. This was the source of the pain. The heart of the forest was wounded, not by a great monster, but by small careless acts. This was a problem no sword could fix. A sword could cut and break, but it could not mend. This looked like a very big problem, didn't it? What do you think would be the very first thing you would do to help this sad place? Tim didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt a quiet sense of purpose. He began his work, not with a knight's charge, but with a caretaker's patience. He started with the stream. One by one, he moved the rocks that were choking the flow of water. It was hard work, and his armor was heavy, but the thought of the clean water flowing again gave him strength. He carefully arranged them to create a small, gentle waterfall, and as the clear water began to flow into the bog, it seemed to sigh in relief. The stagnant mud slowly began to clear, and the sweet smell of clean water filled the air. Next, he turned his attention to the wounded trees. He couldn't magically heal the cuts, but he could show them care. He gently cleaned the marks, washing away the grime with water from the newly freed stream. He whispered to each tree, a soft apology for the hurt it had been caused. It was a strange thing for a knight to do, whispering to trees, but it felt more right than anything he had ever done with his sword. He then gathered the rusted, forgotten tools. He didn't throw them aside, but found a hollow in an old, fallen log and placed them there, covering them with leaves and soil. He was burying the hurt, returning the metal to the earth from which it had come. He worked for hours, his every action a quiet promise to the forest. A promise of respect. As the sun began to set, casting long gentle shadows across the clearing, Tim finished his work. The heart of the woods was not perfectly healed, but it was breathing again. The water flowed freely. The trees stood a little straighter. The air felt lighter, cleaner. A soft, golden light began to emanate from the bark of the ancient oak in the center of the clearing. It pulsed gently like a happy beating heart. The wind rustled through the leaves, and this time, it sounded like a gentle, contented hum. The forest was whispering its gratitude. Tim wasn't afraid of the growing shadows here. They were soft and peaceful, like a warm blanket. He had faced the source of his fear and had found not a monster, but a friend in need of help. He had learned the forest's greatest secret, that some problems are solved not by force, but by a respectful whisper. His journey back to the castle was very different. The path seemed brighter, the woods alive with friendly sounds. The bramble thicket offered him sweet berries as he passed. The river gurgled a happy tune at his feet. He felt no fear, only a deep connection to the living world around him. He felt like a true knight for the first time, not because of his armor or his sword, but because he had protected something that couldn't protect itself. He had been a champion for the woods. When he pushed open the heavy castle doors, he braced himself for the sight of the terrible twisting shadows. But they were gone. In their place, the evening light cast beautiful, gentle shadows on the walls. They looked like the peaceful shapes of leaves and branches. They swayed and danced softly, not with menace but with grace. The shadow of the suit of armor looked like a tall, strong tree. The shadow of the chair looked like a smooth, river stone. His castle was no longer haunted by the forest's sadness. It was filled with its calm and peaceful spirit. Tim smiled. He was no longer afraid. He understood now that the shadows were just a different kind of light. They held no fear, only stories. He had brought the peace of the whispering woods back home with him. From that day on, Tim was a different kind of knight. He still polished his armor, but he spent more time tending to the gardens of the castle and ensuring the lands around his home were cared for. He would often walk into the whispering woods, not with a sword, but with a watering can or a handful of seeds. He learned the names of the trees and the songs of the birds. He had learned the most important lesson of all. To be a true protector, you must first learn to respect that which you are protecting. He was no longer Tarnished Tim, the knight who feared shadows. He was Tim the Whisperer, the knight who was a friend to the forest. And he slept soundly every night, his dreams filled with the gentle, rustling whispers of the trees. What a wonderful adventure of learning that was. Respect is a kind of magic we can all use every single day. Perhaps our next adventure will take us deep beneath the sparkling waves to learn the colorful secrets of the Coral Castle. What do you think we might find there? Educational core. This story teaches the importance of environmental stewardship and how to show respect for nature through gentle, caring actions rather than force. Moral core. True strength and the most effective solutions to problems often come from quiet understanding and respect, not from conflict or power. Moral core. True strength and the most effective solutions to problems often come from quiet understanding and respect, not from conflict or power.